Hello, this is a homily for the 20th Sunday in Ordinary Time. Our first reading is from Isaiah chapter 56, verses 1, 6, and 7. Our psalm is Psalm 67. Our second reading is from Romans chapter 11, verses 13 to 15 and 29 to 32. And our gospel is Matthew chapter 15, verses 21 to 28. Observe what is right. Do what is just. For my salvation is about to come, my justice about to be revealed. In our first reading today, the prophet goes on to explain that God's justice in this instance relates to foreigners in the land. It talks about bringing them into the fold, not keeping them at a distance, not keeping them separate. The foreigners who join themselves to the Lord, who become his servants, keep the Sabbath, hold to my covenant. It says, "Them I will bring to my holy mountain, make joyful in my house of prayer. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples." All peoples, even foreigners. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines foreigner as one not native to a place or a community. Now, a lot has been made and discussed about foreigners as of late. Immigration, undocumented persons, building a wall. But many of the very first foreigners that came to this country, who came in our nation's infancy, did not cross a river to get here. They crossed an ocean, and they crossed it in chains. Hundreds of thousands of African slaves were brought to the United States, and it is estimated that by 1863 there were 3 million slaves in this country. The peculiar institution, as it has been called, existed until the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863, officially freeing the 3 million slaves. Of course, it was only on paper, and equality has still been a long time coming. But we do like to think that, as the Lord said through the prophet Isaiah, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all people," because I believe that we do all want justice and equality. And it's this idea of equality and justice that makes our gospel reading so challenging today, because Jesus doesn't come across as loving or particularly kind or filled with the idea of equality or justice. He doesn't come across as being inclusive of foreigners. The Canaanite woman calls out to him for help, and he ignores her. The disciples want to send her away. She's loud and annoying, she's bothersome and complaining. Jesus says, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." It seems as if he's saying, I'm not here to help this person, this lady and her people. Their problems are not my concern. So she asks Jesus again, and he breaks it down for her. He explains the racial hierarchy. He says it's not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs. He's saying, look, lady, I'm not here to help you. I'm here to help the Jews. They're my chosen people, not you Canaanites. You people are less than human. You people are like animals. You people are dogs. And now we have to understand that Jesus is just expressing the prevailing social views of the time. The Israelites were God's chosen people, and everybody else was not. Everybody else was less than the Jews. The Jews were up here and everyone else was way down here on the scale of human worth. Everybody else was no more valuable than the animals. Not even the good animals like the donkeys and the cattle and the sheep. Oh no, they were as lowly as those no good, dirty old egg-sucking dog. That was just how it was in that time and in that place. And Jesus is reflecting that racist sentiment that prevailed among the Jews. This racial hierarchy with the Israelites at the top and everyone else at the bottom. But it didn't remain that way forever. The swastika is a symbol of a dark and ugly past. It is a symbol of a time when the Jewish people and many others were seen as less than human. It is a symbol of a time when the Jews and many other people were not worthy of life. It is a symbol of a time and a place where our Catholic principle of respect for life for all life, from conception to death, was nowhere to be found. It is a symbol of the evil that can be found in this world, the evil that the Nazi Party embodied. And in World War II, the Allies, the Americans especially, our greatest generation of Americans, got over there and won that war, and we put an end to all that nonsense. People are people. All humans have worth. All people are entitled to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. That's what we believe. And after we won that war and defeated the Nazis, all their statues and symbols had to come down. They all had to go. We cleaned them out. We even blew up that great big swastika that they had over the Nuremberg fields. The Nuremberg fields, you'll remember, are those giant fields where you had all the famous footage of Hitler at his rallies with all the stormtroopers marching by with the goose step and the salute and the whatnot. We blew that giant swastika right out of there. That was good old-fashioned 20th century American justice. Rid the world of all that evil. Everybody's human. Everybody deserves life. Of course, history being complicated as it is, if you look back at the 19th century, about 100 years before we were blowing up swastikas in Nuremberg, you can see that in this country we did not really believe in that equality. John Hunt Morgan, the Thunderbolt of the Confederacy, they called him, one of the greatest cavalrymen that the Confederate Army had, maybe that ever was. He was born in Alabama, but he grew up right here in Lexington, Kentucky. Went to Transylvania University for a while. He owned a hemp factory. He organized the Lexington Rifle Brigade, and when the South seceded, he led his Lexington Rifles to join up with the Confederacy. He attacked and harried and disrupted the Union Army throughout Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, and Indiana. His famous raids in Ohio and Indiana during the year of 1863 were the furthest north that the Confederate troops ever penetrated. Of course, it was widely reported, even by his brother-in-law and cohort, Basil Duke, who wrote a biography of him, it was widely reported that there were inexcusable excesses taken by the men under Morgan's command. Excesses that included revenge taken against families and farms that Morgan and his raiders encountered along the way. But that was just part of it, I suppose. He was an expert in guerrilla warfare. A local boy. He's got a statue over by the old courthouse. You may have heard about it. There's another statue over there, too, of John C. Breckinridge. John C. Breckinridge, the former Vice President of the United States. John C. Breckinridge, the congressman, the senator from Kentucky. John C. Breckinridge, the one-time presidential candidate. John C. Breckinridge, the Confederate general. John C. Breckinridge, the slave owner. And to understand what these statues symbolize to many fellow Americans, fellow Christians, fellow humans, you have to understand what the Civil War was about, what the Confederacy was all about. Southern apologists will tell you that the Civil War was fought over states' rights. It was about the federal government overstepping its bounds. But what was the right that the southern states were concerned about? It wasn't the speed limit, or the lotto, or the drinking age, or whether you can have a slot machine at your racetrack. Slavery was what the southern states were concerned with. John C. Breckinridge ran for president in 1860 against Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas as the candidate for the Southern Democratic Party. The party advocated states' rights, slaves as personal property. They also advocated new territories coming in as states to be open to slavery. And they also advocated the enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Law. The Fugitive Slave Law provided for the return of runaway slaves to their masters, extradition from the free states, if you will. The Fugitive Slave Law also did not allow for the fugitives to testify in their own behalf. So the way that it worked was that whether you were actually a fugitive slave or just a Yankee blackfella, it didn't really matter, because you couldn't testify. The Fugitive Slave Law also called for heavy penalties for federal marshals who didn't enforce the law, penalties for those who helped the fugitive slaves, and special commissioners with full jurisdiction to enforce the law, made the slave catchers legal-like. Now, being a slave owner himself, I imagine that Mr. Breckinridge would be concerned that if his slaves did escape, he would want to have them returned. It was his personal property, after all. Now, as politicians do, Mr. Breckinridge did generally assert that he was only seeking to uphold states' rights. It wasn't about slavery. But he did give a speech right down the road here at Henry Clay's estate, in which he challenged anybody to name a time that he had ever been sympathetic to the very idea of emancipation. And of course no one could, because he never had been sympathetic or open to the idea of emancipation. And if your party's platform is slavery, and you're the candidate, and you're a slave owner, it's pretty difficult to prove that you are not pro-slavery. So I can see how a statue of a slave owner who ran against Abraham Lincoln on a pro-slavery ticket and later became the Secretary of War for the Confederacy, I can see how this statue would be offensive to many people, especially those people whose ancestors were the foreigners brought here in chains. And I can see how that statue could be seen as a symbol of slavery and all the dirty little words that go along with it. Racism, bigotry, hate, murder, kidnapping, rape, mutilation, torture. And I can see how a statue of a highly skilled Confederate cavalry general who fought his hind end off for slavery, I can see how his statue would be an equally abhorrent symbol of a dark period in our nation's history. And I can see how we don't need to have these statues in our downtown, even though they've been there for as long as anyone can remember. I can see how we don't need to have them down there because they are hurtful and painful for our brothers and sisters, for God's children in this house of prayer. I can see how symbols are powerful. And I can see how we don't need these statues in order to remember this dark period, or in order to learn from our mistakes, or acknowledge our past, or any of the other reasons that well-intentioned people give for the historical significance of these statues, the reasons that they should be preserved. I can see how we don't need these statues to learn about our history, because I learned all this history without ever seeing those statues. And now you've heard all this history without seeing the statues, without the symbols. Because this is the only symbol that we really need in our lives. This symbol of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. This symbol of His love for all of us, all humans, all people, no matter where they're from or what color we are. This symbol that stands for this house of prayer for all people. Because at the end of our gospel today, Jesus acknowledged the woman. He finally commended her faith. He finally granted her request. His kindness and His compassion, His understanding, are showing us that just because something has been a certain way for as long as anyone can remember, doesn't mean it has to stay that way. So when our brothers and sisters cry out for help, have faith. Stand up for what's right. When our peers and friends say, don't pay attention to those people, they are always complaining about something, have faith. Stand up for what's right. When we're told it's not our problem, that we're not here to help those people, have faith. Stand up for what's right. And when we're told those people are animals, and don't waste our time and resources on them, have faith. Stand up for what's right. Have faith that God will lead us to do the right thing, that God's justice will prevail, that Jesus will say to us, like He said to the Canaanite woman, O people, how great is your faith. Let it be done as you wish. Brothers and sisters, while we still have time, let us do good.